Almost there.
No worries. Is it possible to turn mics, volume up a little?
Hey, Bonnie, would it be okay if I quick tested my PowerPoint quick?
Yes, go ahead. And then we're good to go as soon as you're ready.
All right. Is Joanna back? I saw she walked out.
Oh.
All right. Can you guys see that?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right. I'll start when you guys are ready.
You have to announce.
We
that
are
you're
gonna-
doing.
We're good?
Yep.
Okay. The Board of Zoning Adjustment for this date. The first case before us is 08 of 23, Tabula Rasa Land Company LLC. And the applicant is requesting a 13 front yard setback variance with 30 feet is required. A site with a new attached garage due to topographical hardships. This lot contains 2.6 acres and is located in the AR 10 zone district.
Oh, Rick, I'm sorry, may I address Christoph? Christoph, are you still there?
I am still here, yes.
Okay, we're gonna need you for the first case because one of our three members has to recuse himself, so we'll need you for the first one, if you can hang with us.
No, that's good.
So let the record reflect that one of our members, Seth, is going to step down this case as he has a conflict of interest. And we still have a quorum. The applicant is represented by Michael, address your name, give me your names for the record.
Yep. Thanks. Mike Kramer with Kramer Land Planning.
And Mike, you have your notice of posting reflected somewhere. Did you find that, Joanna?
Yes.
Let the record reflect that you do have that notice of publication, and then Mike, you have the floor.
Okay. Thanks, Rick. And thank you, Board of Adjustment. Sorry, I'm not there today. I'm under the weather. But we'll do Zoom, and we also have Melanie and Scott from Z Group Architects here too, in case there's any architectural questions. I'm not sure I think they have my name underneath their tab, but that's who they are there. I'm going to quick share my screen. We have a really brief presentation. I know you have a big agenda tonight. But like I said, Mike Kramer, helping the property owner, Tabula Rasa Land Company, LLC. We submitted a front yard setback variance request, and we also have an activity envelope and a site plan application for a single family residence and a garage for a 5,750 square foot development. And that application is nearing completion with the planning office. Our presentation is short. Like I said, we're going to provide some property background information on site conditions. And then we'll demonstrate the two hardships that we feel we have and the variance request to alleviate those hardships. Okay, this is a vicinity map of the area. Properties highlighted in blue. It's within the 1966 platted Brush Creek Village subdivision, and it's adjacent to obviously other Brush Creek lots. The lots to the north and south are also developed with single-family residences. Properties accessed off of Tabula Rasa Lane via Medicine Bow Road, and it's a third switch back up as you're winding your way up to the property in Brush Creek subdivision. Here's an overall site map of the property in blue. It's 2.6 acres, well, almost 2.6 acres in size, and located in the AR10 zone district. And that makes it legal non-conforming in size. But Brush Creek subdivision was platted prior to 1972, and it retains a GMQS exemption for 5,750 square feet of development. The lot is really steep. It's generally over 30%, leading all the way down to Medicine Bow Road. This is the lower portion of the lot. This is the upper portion of the lot over here. And the lot contains mostly just dry land vegetation, oak brush, and dry mountain understory. This slide shows the least steep portion of the lot, which is highlighted in orange here. And that's in the northwest portion And we're trying to highlight to show you that the least steep portion of the lot has been proposed for development. Remaining portion of this lot in red is really, really steep with slopes over 30% and 45%. And now you have to reorient yourself. Now the north arrow down here, the property, kind of this site plan shifts a little bit, but this is the survey and slope map of the property. And in addition to steep slopes on the western side over here, highlighted in blue, the property is also encumbered by a private restrictive easement to the benefit of the property to the north at 122 Tabula Rasa. This easement restricts development and cannot be used, and it's highlighted in yellow on this map right here. This is a reoriented slide, but this is what we submitted with our land use application. This is our proposed site plan. And I want to say that this was really well thought out, really well crafted site plan to site the residence and the attached garage on the least steep portion of the property. And we avoid utilizing the lower portion of the property where slopes are really steep and vegetation is really dense. The proposed activity envelope in this map is highlighted in light green right here. And then the driveway, which you can see is sited in between the private access easement, which is the darker green over here, and then the steep slopes over here. And then obviously the septic field is located below the main house here lower on the site. All right, next slide. This is a southwest elevation of the proposed residence. You can see that the architecture of the home steps down the hillside and follows the contours of the lot. And this design was really deliberate. Z Group did a great job following the contours of the property. And the main and lower levels are attached, and they utilize the descending slope on the property. And what this design does is it avoids creating a completely flat building site and a lot of disturbance on the property. So we were really cognizant about utilizing the contours of the property and where the garage would sit in relation to the setbacks. This is a zoom in of the site plan. It shows the edge of the garage. And what we want to demonstrate tonight is that due to unusual topographical conditions and that private access, that private restrictive easement, it creates a unique property condition in our variance request tonight. So specifically, the applicant is requesting a 17-foot variance to establish a new 13-foot front yard setback. And the established setback in the zone district is 30 feet. And the purpose of this reduction is twofold. And the first being the siting of the garage in the proposed location creates a land use code and Aspen Fire Protection District compliant driveway that meets requirements. If the garage was sited setback compliant, it's likely we can't meet grade requirements and it would be too steep. And then the second reason for this request is the location of the garage and the step design creates compliance with the scenic view protection standards. Brush Creek Road, as everyone probably knows, is a scenic corridor. And if the structure was sited setback compliant, it would push development down the hill towards the scenic corridor. And then there's likely a ridgeline issue that we'd have to deal with. The setback variance is really reasonable and it creates compliance with these two code standards. Also, the property is located at the end of an undeveloped cul-de-sac, and we don't feel it will cause substantial detriment to the public good or impair the purpose of the intent of the Pickens County Land Use Code or the comp plan. So here's directly, this is a really boring slide, but this is directly from the Land Use Code. And we just want to remind the Board of Adjustment of, their setback variance charges and hardships. But we're arguing that due to unusual topographical conditions and other unique site situations on this property, we have a really unique hardship. And our variance request, again, garage 13 feet from the front property line, topographical hardship, and a unique property condition has been established. And if the variance is granted, we're confident we can get a code compliant driveway and can build that. And then finally, if we get the variance request granted, the structure will be compliant with scenic view protection requirements and ridgeline review and avoid the steep slopes down the hill. So that's our presentation, and I'm happy to try and entertain questions if there are any.
Thank you, Mike. Good presentation. Christoph, do you have any questions of the applicant?
Nothing from my end. I get both the driveway condition that's there and then understand why it needs to be placed where it's at.
I did have a question. This private easement, how did that encumber this property from the neighbor next door?
It's a
Backstory on that.
Yeah, it's a really good question. At one time, the subject property 148 Tabula Rasa and then 122 Tabula Rasa were under the same ownership, and the name escapes me. Scott or Melanie, do you remember the name of the property owner? Was it Donald Stone, I think? Yeah, I got a thumbs up there. But he owned them both. And before Mr. Stone sold the property, he granted himself an easement on 148 that basically restricts any kind of development in that location. And then after he did that, he sold the property to our client, Tabula Rasa Land Company, LLC, who bought it knowing that there was a restrictive easement on it. And then, you could go down the design path and start figuring out what can and can't happen. And that leads us here today, with the variance request.
Thank you for that. Darling, you had a question?
No, it seems pretty straightforward to me with the restrictions that they have.
I kind of agree. It's certainly a minimal variance, and there's certainly demonstrated topographical hardship. And there's no other questions of the applicant. I would entertain a motion. Yes. Anybody want to take a stab at it?
I would make a motion to accept it because of the hardship of the topographical and also to have the view plane situation correct from 82.
Okay, thank you very much. Do I have a second to that motion?
Yeah, I would second that.
Okay, all those in favor, so signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Think you got your variance, Michael.
All right. Thank you so much, Board of Adjustment. We really appreciate it.
Hope you feel better, buddy.
I appreciate that too. Thank you.
Thanks, you guys. Appreciate your time.
Great, thank you.
Okay, Chris, are you getting ready?
Yes, it'll take me a minute here to figure out the computer system. Can I put a thumb drive into this?
I don't know if that one's turned on.
I have my thumb.
Let the records reflect that Seth is back, Johnson again. And Chris, I guess you should know that member that's in Denver Airport right now. It's catching a 7 o'clock flight.
It would be easier if you actually. joined
Yeah,
the
so
video.
I will stay on for as long as humanly possible here.
Appreciate that, Christoph. So, as we do other patients for us, and we don't have a full complement of our board, you as the applicant have the right to table to a date certain while we can assemble a full board. So tonight you're gonna have 3.5 members.
And
Basically.
minimum is 3 to proceed. I understand that.
So I guess at any time you feel like you might want to table this.
The Zoom meeting.
I have your link. I think I should be able to join.
So Rick, we do have a few members of the public online too, when you open it up.
Okay, when we get to the public comment section, we'll see if they want to make some comments.
Yeah.
Thank you for reminding me of that.
And we'll just need everyone to identify themselves for the record, okay, before you speak.
Licking County Care, all lowercase. Sorry, everyone.
We're getting there. Yes, Jackson.
Yep. There we go. No, sorry.
Okay.
Yeah. So. You know what? If we County into your name. Licking County Care, all lowercase. Oh, man, yeah. I'm sorry.
Sorry, we're getting there.
One more down. One more down. It's hiding. There we go. Licking County Cares all one piece. There we go. You should just unmute your sound and your video.
Recording in progress.
And then your sound. Mute off of them. Perfect. Okay. You need to be able to present.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, success so far.
Good.
All right.
Okay, we're gonna open up case 09 of 23, Emmett Fields LLC, 50 Distillers Way. The applicant requests multiple height variance, arterial, hardway, and front yard setback variances to bury 4 new fire suppression tanks within the required setbacks. This lot contains 8 acres and is located in the U zone district. Chris, do you have your notice of posting?
I do. It's been provided through Sages. I have a physical copy is here as well, if the county staff
Okay, let the record-
wants.
And I've read through your application, every page. But be cognizant of the fact that we have some members of the public that are contesting this variance, so I'm gonna try and keep this as tight as we can, make it into it tonight. I can't speak for my other members, but I have not had a chance to go down there and look at this physically. And depending on where this thing goes, we may be requiring a site visit, but you have the floor, my friend, Chris Benden.
Okay, thank you very much. Chris Benden with Benden Adams. Here representing the applicant, which is the Emma Fields LLC. Matt Patel is here to my right. He is the principal of Emma Fields. Mary Elizabeth Geiger is here, attorney for the Emma Fields. Online somewhere in the internet is Luke Bamberger, Anderson Mason Dale Architects, designer of the project, and Deborah Shaner of Shaner Life Safety. I'll be brief, but I do want to be comprehensive going through this. And I know it's important to the board and to everyone involved to have a good record of what's going on. The property is here on Google Map, just up valley of Basalt, down valley of Old Snowmass. It's in the what we all call the Holland Hills area. It's not technically in Holland Hills, but it's in that general area in that long straight section before you hit Basalt. Here's an aerial. This is prior to Emma Fields going under construction. This is a prior, there was a landscaping operation there before, and before that there was a lumber yard. And it was sort of a stagnant site for a long time before Matt picked up and started the application for the Emma Fields. Here is an aerial taken last winter of the project under construction. The Emma Fields project went through a full review with the Board of County Commissioners, received unanimous approval, and I think triggered a lot of good will with the Board of County Commissioners and a lot of things that Matt decided to include in the project. The activity envelope map is filed, and I've highlighted the buildings here. The buildings in green are the distillery buildings. The sort of tan shaded buildings are 3 affordable housing units. The property borders State Highway 82, as you see there on the bottom of the map. The orange line is Hoagland Ranch Road. And that serves multiple properties. We have one access point into this property shown with the blue arrow there off of Hoagland into our property on what is now called Distillers Way. The property is now 50 Distillers Way. That's the address. Previously, it was referred to as 100 Hoagland Ranch Road. And as I mentioned, there are other properties serviced off of Hoagland Ranch Road. Original request to the county had just 2 affordable housing units consisting of a house and a caretaker. During our review with the Board of County Commissioners, they really quizzed us on the purpose of the house and the caretaker. And we said, well, look, we just want to have affordable housing for our employees. So we converted them into affordable housing units. We add a 3rd unit, which the Board of County Commissioners asked us to look into, which actually works much better for our use. As I mentioned, is repurposing of a languishing property that had gone dormant for some time. I mentioned BOCC look kindly on this project for a lot of things that Matt decided to do under his own volition. He was utilizing socially and environmentally friendly construction and operational practices. Is pursuing qualification under what's called the Living Building Challenge, which is a very robust program for environmentally efficient buildings, but also for the sort of social impact that they provide in their development and as an ongoing basis. So other like LEED and other programs are sort of a one-time. This is an ongoing program, the Living Building Challenge. The project had a series of water tanks for fire suppression. Just like any project, they would need water tanks for fire suppression. Standard requirement of any development, especially important in this location, given the lack of water for firefighting in the immediate neighborhood. So it's not a distillery specific requirement, really. Any development on this property would have that requirement. There's a specific hydrant and tank design parameters that you can imagine that must be met for a system to work. A combination of sort of simple physics, the codes, and the assessment of the fire marshal of the applicable jurisdiction. The initial design had located the water tanks and a hydrant towards the rear of the property. So you can see in that blue square. So went through the proper reviews with the county and the referral agencies, including a review by the fire marshal. When the project went in for permit, the tank and hydrant location were found to be unacceptable. And while the physics could work, the location required a fire truck to go past buildings that could be engulfed. And that, well, that's a sort of an obvious parameter, was realized when we get into permit. And any kind of tanker truck or anything that need to come refill would have that same parameter. So a new location was identified here near the entry point of the property. Exhibit 8.1 in your packet goes through the process of identifying the location and the teams, the design team's progression, applying each location criterion as a means of identifying where the tanks could and could not go. Starting simply with the location of the hydrant itself, the location needing to be along the entry drive as a requirement of the fire marshal, and just for practical purposes. Location requiring going past the building would be unacceptable. And the fire truck needing to be getting out of the way of the exiting traffic. Next, the tanks themselves must be located in close proximity, as close as you can get to the hydrant, providing both a horizontal parameter and a vertical parameter for how that distance would be. This brings in fluid dynamics, which I don't know much about, but I know that is important. And must be respected. The tanks require a minimal cover, soil cover, to protect the devices from freeze, and the tanks cannot be too high or too low. Again, the fluid dynamics comes into play with all the parameters of distance, pipe sizing, head pressure of the water itself, the vertical relationship, the hydraulic friction that would happen if the pipes are too long. All the things you need to learn about if you achieve a degree in fire suppression system engineering. There's also a very practical parameter, and the further the tanks are from the hydrant, the more things that could go wrong, right? So pipes can get crushed, a landscaper digs a hole for a new tree, bursts a pipe. So there's a practical parameter there that you want the tanks to be as close to the hydrant as you can get for just practical purposes. And this is what you need to think of if you're a fire suppression systems engineer, while your expertise is actually a matter of life or death, and the optimal plan ends up being the safest plan. The tanks can't be underneath buildings. They can't go underneath where vehicles drive because the tanks themselves could get crushed. They can't go under trees. And so we use this process to systematically eliminate areas, as you see in the red shading here, and reveal the acceptable areas for the tanks. The result is a location along that first section of Distillers Way, right when you come in, the hydrant being on the right, where you can pull the fire truck out of the exiting traffic, the tanks on the left, It's easy to fill. The distance is very short, and it's not in one of these red areas. That allows the fire truck to connect the hydrant and then engage in the fire that's going on. Provides the physics that works and it meets all the applicable codes. These tanks also provide enhanced fire protection to the neighborhood. So it's not just a facility for Emma Fields Distillery, but there's a benefit to that surrounding neighborhood. This was designed by a highly respected and capable design team of fire suppression systems folks. I did include in the application a resume of Deborah Shaner. I just want to hit on a couple of high points in her resume. She's a fire protection engineer. She has a bachelor's in civil engineering from Colorado School of Mines, master's in fire protection engineering from the University of Maryland. She's registered as a professional engineer in Colorado, Nebraska, Nevada, New Mexico, Utah, and Wyoming. And she is the engineer of record for this fire suppression system. And the reason I bring that up is that this is a very competent team that addressed this. Ms. Shaner, along with Mr. Bamberger, and others, civil engineers and hydrologists going through what needs to be done for this system to be effective. Exhibit 8 goes through the narrative that Luke provided that goes along with these graphics. Again, he's the architect with Anderson Mason Dale. And both Ms. Shaner and Mr. Bamberger are on the line.
Chris, may I interrupt? That's
Yeah.
another question. When was this team assembled? Was it after you went through the land use process to establish this project? Why wasn't, if they're so good at this, why weren't they in there before they discovered what was proposed and approved is in the wrong place? Were they brought in after that discovered?
It's, without going too far down this road, there was a change in the fire marshal's office. The former fire marshal had reviewed the original planning application and it was accepting of the location. The new fire marshal came in and said, no. I'm not good with that location for the driving past burning buildings issue. So that can happen as a project goes through the various phases and there's changes in personnel and so on. So we needed to back up and address that issue. With this new information, we approached the county with this new location. A change order was submitted and approved. County staff determined that the changes were necessary for emergency access and firefighting purposes, and relocating the tanks did not require an amendment to the site plan. And that was at the beginning of this. The change order permit was issued in October of 22. And the quote I just read was from a letter from planning staff issued earlier this year, January 18 of 23. The change order number 1028.2022.PCHG was issued last October. There's a ton of information on SAGES, the county's building permit system, regarding the submissions and the comments and all the additional information that came along with that change order. This is Exhibit 5 in the application. We asked SGM Engineering to get a little bit more precise around the previous historic topography of the site. So after the tanks were installed, there was a complaint that the tanks were installed higher than what was in that change order. And so we got more precise with those pre-development grades. This is a copy of that survey with an estimate of pre-development topography in that area. As you can imagine, between the highway, the development of Hoagland Ranch Road, and the various activities that have happened on this property over time, there've been changes in the grade. It's been manipulated over the years. And in fact, right where the tanks are located, there is a driveway entrance that was installed some years ago. That was cut into that hillside. So as you probably know, having an accurate pre-development grade is an important measuring point for all these matters. SGM Engineering is one of the top civil engineering firms in the state, and their in-house survey department is one of the best land survey outfits around. This drawing is a stamp drawing with a full backing and qualification of SGM Engineering. From SGM's pre-development survey, we pinpointed the actual positioning and elevations above mean sea level for every element of the tanks. We've applied for 6 variances. That's probably quite redundant, but we want to make sure all our bases are covered. So this is the location of the tanks themselves, the collars, the lids, and the vent risers with pinpointed ground elevations above mean sea level. And this then gives us the location of the setbacks. So to go through the 6 requests, the first one is a 52-foot arterial highway setback variance. We'd asked staff whether we need a setback variance or a height variance or both. There was, I think, some kind of back and forth, a little bit of confusion. So we ended up applying for both. Again, we may be over asking, but we want to make sure that we are covering all bases. So this is a 52-foot variance from Highway 82. County setback limitations applied to improvements from the ground up. And you can probably picture that there's all kinds of subgrade improvements that are not typically subject to setbacks, water pipes and electrical conduit and any number of things. But being extra cautious, we requested a setback variation for the fire suppression tanks, lid vents, and the soil cover in its distance from Highway 82. That's the first request. Second request is very similar. This is a 12-foot variation request from the setback, the front yard setback from Hoagland Ranch Road. Backing up a second, the required arterial highway setback is 100 feet and we're set back 48 feet. So that's where you get the 52-foot difference. Setback requirement from Hoagland is 50 feet as a requirement. We are approximately 38 feet. So that's where you get the 12-foot request. And again, this is for the tanks themselves with all the appurtenant vents and soil cover and so on. 2 sections are shown in the application as Exhibit 6. And these show the heights of every tank component, the tanks and all the lids and so on. These grades are taken directly from the SGM pre-development survey grade analysis. These 2 sections taken through the property and the tanks provide us with the next few setback or the height requirement variance requirements. So guidance from county staff was not 100% regarding all the variances needed. So again, we may be over asking here, but we want to make sure all of us bases are covered. County code limits grading in the setback to 30 inches. And there's also a berm provision. There was some confusion about, was this a berm, is this grading? And they have different parameters. So the grading parameter is 30 inches. Our finished height above mean sea level is 6,771.4 feet for the tanks themselves. It's approximately 52 inches above the pre-development grade, and that's represents our third request, which is 22-inch variance from the height, the grading height, and that includes the soil cover and such above the tanks. County code limits a berm to 48 inches in the setback. So grading needs to happen to create a berm. But is a berm grading or is grading a berm, et cetera? Again, we've sort of covering all bases by applying under the berm limitations as well. So that elevation of 6,771.4 is 52 inches above the pre-development grade, and that's a 4-inch variance request over the berm regulations of 48 inches. So that's our fourth request. Number 5 and 6 deal with the stuff that happens above the tank that is required to service and use the tank. So there's lots of things that happen, improvements that happen routinely in setback areas that, to our knowledge, don't go through a variance process. So you may have things like a transformer or a cable box, utility pedestals, shut off valves, bollards and stanchions for keypads, and any number of things that happen at setback. But there's not a particular provision for each one of those in the county's regulations: lighting, trees, shrubs, etc., boulders. And these items happen on practically every project. And again, to be ultra cautious, we included this in our variance request. The county's practice seems to indicate that these types of incidental devices are not regulated by height or setback regulations. However, we've applied anyway. So the fifth request is regarding the collar and lid that sits above the tanks. This obviously needs to come up above grade. There's a functional requirement, as you can imagine. The collar and lid sit at an elevation 6,772 feet above mean sea level. And that represents no more than 16 inches above the finished ground height. So when you open up the tank, the lid, you don't want stuff falling into it because that's going to contaminate the system. So that's why it has to stick up above grade. The final is the vents for the tanks. So this sort of upside down snorkel looking thing is a functional requirement of tanks, allows the tanks to breathe when you're pulling water out. The recovery area can go back into the tank so you don't create a suction. The vents are at an elevation 6,773.8 feet above mean sea level and no more than 38 inches above the finished ground height. Your criteria, I won't read to you, I'm sure you're familiar with, but you know that zoning doesn't fit every certain circumstances. The whole reason that you exist as a board. And we have and you deal with these unusual situations that would otherwise present a peculiar practical difficulty or an undue hardship upon the property owner. We have an unusual set of conditions. We have a single access point along which the hydrant must be located and the tanks must be in close proximity. We've gone through every process the county has acquired and have acquired all the needed approvals, applied for and received permits and received approval for the location of these tanks. When we knew we needed to move the tanks, we asked the appropriate authorities and followed their direction. October of 2022, when we received our approved change order, of distillery buildings were substantially complete, and we had invested millions at that point. So with all that, the property is not a blank slate. We have a specific site plan approved by the Board of County Commissioners. We have specific performance obligations of a private covenant. We have buildings erected in conformance with county codes and permits and land use approvals. Moving these buildings is more than a peculiar practical difficulty, right? It's just not possible. The locations were set by the BOCC. At this point, after investing as much as we have in reliance on those approvals and permits, allowing the tanks to go where they are currently located is the appropriate way to move forward. Fire suppression system is not optional. It's not just for this use, but for any use of this property. All these conditions represent an unusual situation of the property. Strict application of the height, yard, and road setback regulations would represent a clear burden and undue hardship on the Emma Fields. No detriment to the public will occur if you grant this relief. In fact, the increased fire suppression capabilities is a benefit to the public and certainly to the neighborhood. Sections 1-50 and 1-60 of the Pickens County Land Use Code details the basis and purpose of the land use code, the comprehensive plan and the land use policies of the county. I'm not going to go through all those policies. They're numerous, ranging from preserving wilderness and ski areas and ecological bill of rights, the airport, citizen housing, economic sustainability, public participation, goes on and on and on. The presence of these fire suppression tanks will not impair those purposes. Did want to touch on what you may be hearing in public comment. We have a neighbor who's expressed opposition to this project and has hired his own design professionals to perform their own analysis, and I'm sure he'll speak to this. I want to be clear that the folks hired by the neighbor are reputable professionals. I've worked with these folks and have no quarrel with their competence, but they're not fire suppression system engineers. They're not providing actual designs. They're not guaranteeing the work. They're not the applicant. They haven't submitted any designs. They don't have a fire marshal approval. They don't have a permit from Pickens County, and they haven't received approval for anything. So these suggestions may be theories, they may be hypotheticals with no actual warranty. Be different if they're presenting a guaranteed design or providing you with a certified stamp plan and the building permit to go build it. They're not doing anything near that. But we have hired highly qualified and highly reputable fire suppression system engineer, worked with a highly reputable civil engineer, employed a very qualified architectural team, submitted stamped warranted plans, gained approvals, gained permits, and done the actual work, and we stand behind the work that we're presenting. Lastly, I want to say that Matt is a decent person and has a great project, and BOCC has been very receptive to the project. I know this is not necessarily in your criteria, but I did want to mention that Matt has consistently worked well with his neighbors to alleviate issues as they've come up during construction. His relationships with the vast majority of neighbors is positive, and he has continued to reach out to Mr. Hodgkin, you will hear from, in good faith. At the appropriate time, I'd like to enter a few letters that we've received from the neighbors who are directly adjacent to the project in support of both Matt, the project, and of this request. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have for us.
The system's already installed, is that what we're saying?
Correct.
Let's say all parties involved in this agree that this is the proper site for these tanks. What impacts on this project would there be if we denied this variance? Do you have to dig all of this up and lower it?
There would be a substantial impact. So the location is not just horizontal, it's also vertical. So the diagrams that are presented with the red blots identify the locations that are acceptable locations for the tanks. And there's a quite obvious vertical parameter there that deals with the hydraulic pressure and the head pressure and the hydraulic friction, so that the hydrant is effective when the fire truck comes and draws water out of it. So in a sense, it would be going back, completely going back to the drawing board. And that's why what we're suggesting is that would represent a pretty severe hardship upon the landowner, right? Once the buildings are there, you can't just move them around. They're no longer lines on paper, they're actual real buildings.
One other question that was raised by the opposition with regards to this community garden. Apparently this was supposed to be the area where this was going to occur. Is there Is there any discussion on where else that might go within this project?
The representations that were made for the project approvals have an area where folks on property, employees of the Emma Fields can go on their lunch break or what have you. It's not a public park. I think there's been some confusion around that parameter, but it is not a public park. There was not that representation. There's no requirement that it be a public park. The Emma Field and that can invite people certainly to their property, but it is private property. The design and location of that area is slightly adjusted with the tanks being there, but not in a dramatically different way.
If I may just add to that real quick, this is Mary Elizabeth Geiger as attorney for the applicant. One of the BOCC conditions of the resolution approving the project was specifically that it not be open to the public. The neighbors had been concerned about potential traffic, folks coming in and maybe, drinking and leaving. And so that was a compromise, an agreement that Matt and Emma Fields, made, is that the property would not be open to the public. So this was not a neighborhood park, as Chris indicated, in the sense that anyone could come in and enjoy it. It would be limited to those folks who live on property, work on property, or perhaps under the BOCC resolution, there can be small private parties, but under some pretty restrictive timing and that sort of thing.
Thank you for that clarification. One more question, with regards to the landscape plan, I kind of noticed that there are trees planted around the perimeter of the entire property. Is that?
There's quite a deep discussion that happened with neighbors outside of the public review process to make sure that we were providing screening and so on. That was consistent with the neighbor expectations around that. And that provides frankly provides one of the limitations of where we can place these things, because we can't put the tanks under large trees.
Okay, Christoph, do you have any questions of the applicant?
Yeah, I mean, the only other thing I was gonna say, just to clarify, the original location of the tanks changed as a result of a change of the fire marshal, and that happened after the buildings began and created an existing condition in a sense. And so therefore, when there's a reanalysis of where those could end up going, that's where this whole thing came up.
That's correct. I was trying to be a little more delicate around that, but yes, you're correct.
The opposition mentioned somewhere in their remarks that construction of the buildings was 8 or 9 months before this issue became an issue, and that the fire marshal put the brakes on construction until this was resolved. Is that your understanding?
It came up, but the construction was allowed to continue on with the understanding that the location of the fire tanks would need to be resolved, right?
And if I may also respond again, to add to that. So there are various buildings on the property, including the 3 residences. So each is coming in for a building permit. It's not like one building permit for the entire thing. So, but our understanding is what happened is, as some permits had already been issued, building was starting, other permits were starting through the process, those get referred to the fire district. And that's when, saw this and said, oh, wait a second, we need to do some relocation. So because of the numerous building permits needed, it was kind of an ongoing situation, if that makes sense.
Understood. I'm curious that although these buildings individually are less than 5,000 square feet, and I understand that in the county, anything that exceeds 5,000 square feet has to be sprinkled. And these are all below that. Was there a reason why, given the nature of this business and how well this is, why that was not pursued?
There were quite a few things that contributed to the size of the buildings. There's some operational kind of parameters. There's some design parameters of creating a nice looking site that functions very well. There was a previous operation there that had a certain amount of square footage that was going to be not exceeded by moving forward. The Board of County Commissioners did allow for some flexibility on that to increase the affordable housing component of the project. So there's a lot of things that contributed to the design that you see that has been deployed. And obviously the project went through all the permitting and requirements in terms of what's happening in the buildings, the use itself, and is met all of the fire suppression system requirements. There is a I forget what exhibit, but there's an exhibit in the application from Ms. Shaner going through all the fire requirements that were presented to the fire marshal and has received all those checkouts.
Very good. Joanne, is John Melly here, the fire marshal?
Yes.
Present, yes. Chris, are you done with your presentation?
I am.
I'd like to hear from John if we could. It's an appropriate time.
How are you? John Melly, Roaring Fork Fire Authority. I'd like to make a couple of slight corrections, if I could. First of all, I've been the fire marshal for Roaring Fork Fire or Snowmass and Roaring Fork Fire for quite some time. This was being initially reviewed by my staff. The initial tank and location was really 10,000 gallons, which was insignificant. And this is not an unusual process for me to discuss with the fire protection engineer the possibility of moving tanks before they're installed. So after one of my staff members became ill and had to leave the office suddenly, we started to look more closely at it. And Deborah Shaner, who I've worked with for quite some time, I have a lot of respect for her. And it was brought up in several emails in January of 2022, is let's look at the possibility. And that the initial locations were never 100% approved. In other words, she had notes on that, and the discussion continued where the possibility that we could move the tank to a more advantageous location, not only for this project, but for the community at large. Could we take a look at this? So the discussion took place, and they complemented that discussion by saying, here is a proposed location. The calculations as per NFPA 1142 were applied to the largest single fire event of one building. It's actually based on cubic feet. And Deborah Shaner, as an engineer, could probably explain that a little bit better than I. But the process then evolved where these tanks were then engineered, designed, and relocated based on those facts. So once again, it's not unusual before projects are fully in development that things change. Actually, this development site has changed since the initial approval as well. And so what you were referring to is I did stop the project because there was not any water supply on site and there was vertical construction, wood construction taking place. So we stopped the project. We did not stop all work, however. We just stopped the project to let continuing work go inside the building that was developed and said, let's hold off till we get a water supply to start building another structure. This is all normal process, and they complied with that.
Understood.
Okay.
Thank you. Is that it?
If you don't have any questions, sure. I think that their drafting is a little bit of a iffy science around these elevations. Let me put it this way. We maximize our drafting to 10 feet. You remove atmospheric pressure from piping by the use of a fire pump. A lot of times this is referred to as theoretical lift. And the reason is because there's no fire pump that's absolutely perfect. There is suction problems, there are leak problems, there's friction loss in pipes. So a lot of times we will ask for tanks to be slightly elevated so that we have 5 PSI positive pressure at the source. This complies with that. And it was engineered and designed specifically so that we could access this water quickly. We have found tanks buried lower or ponds that have not been upkept. They are difficult to access water when you're doing drafting. These are not municipal fire hydrants. These do not have any PSI or pressure behind it. So it's all being done by fire trucks arriving on scene. And this makes it the process a lot quicker, a lot more efficient and more reliable.
So overall, you're satisfied with the solution that they come up with in locating these tanks where they are presently?
Yes, I approved once the design was submitted with calculations and the expertise of the engineer. We all rely on expertise of people that are qualified. I have 40 years in the business and have some expertise in how our operations go. But the design of these tanks do meet all of our specifications, and we've tested it. It functions properly. We'll retest it again before the final CO goes in place. We'll make sure those tanks are topped off, and we'll inspect them on a regular basis.
Understood. These tanks, are they going to service the neighborhood at large? Are they going to be able to say the house is burning up the street?
That area of the of our authority has very limited water sources. A process or an operation that Roaring Fork Fire would take would bring tenders, 3,000 gallons at a time, or establish some sort of a water supply off-site and tender it in. And that's how we fight rural fires. So having a 40,000 gallon source that has been calculated, once again, not only for the largest building here, but it's about 5,000 gallons over. But having that source closer to the road, closer to Hoagland Ranch Road, and in that area that does not have a lot of municipal supply, I believe is a benefit. And it was thought out prior. It's not an afterthought. It was also thought out when we discussed moving the tanks, providing the right amount of water, and in the location that they're at.
Very good. Understood.
So in your opinion, this would be an optimal place for the tanks, or is there another location that would actually work?
So potentially, in all earnest, tanks could be located maybe slightly different than in this location, but I wouldn't put them 500 feet away. Now I'm using all that pipeline and friction loss and fire engine pumps to try to draft from that source. The locations are appropriate.
Thank you so much for your time and your service.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Okay, we've been at this for about an hour. Anybody needs a break? Break?
Yeah, we can do that.
Everybody good with that?
Great.
Yeah.
Christoph, are you still on?
Okay, just wait.
Yes.
Hey, do you have about 20 minutes left?
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm probably gonna have to kick off here pretty soon.
Share before we move through. Have you had a chance to visit this site?
Christoph, were you able to hear it?
Yes, yes.
Have you been able to visit this site? Are you familiar with the area?
That's fine.
I have been by the site previously.
Well, let us know when you're about to take off.
I'll let you know when the door closes.
Yes, guys.
Hey, these were in here. These are.
No,
Those aren't yours?
Like they're sitting right there. No. I don't think the board met in here today, though. I thought they were in, oh, they were. Maybe they're, peacocks or Greg, I don't think Greg wears glasses. Yeah. That's something.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. No.
You know, Bonnie, when you're ready to start it up again.
We just need one more. You're ready to go if you want to start back up again.
Early.
Thank you.
Okay, we're gonna adjourn here. Do we have people, that are out there that want to speak, you can get them out of the way?
We have a Bart Johnson on the line.
I'm sitting right here. I presumptuously moved up to the table and in public comment would extend the senior and say
Else that Spear that wanted to comment out there? I guess not. I assume, you're David?
I'm David Hotchman, yes.
Would you identify yourself for the record? And, you have the floor.
Well, I'm gonna turn it over to Bart first, but I'm David Hotchkin.
I'm Bart Johnson. David and I are here on behalf of the Warren Fork Meadows Property Owners Association, which is on Tejas Trail. Tejas Trail is directly across from the Emma Fields property. And the Warren Fork Meadows Owners Association is also a party to the private covenant that's been mentioned that has to do with landscaping and that kind of stuff.
Pardon, how many people are in that association?
7 ones?
Seven homeowners?
And what we'd like to do, with your indulgence, is I'd like to make some introductory remarks, and then I have a PowerPoint that I'm just going to turn over and I'll control it, but then Dave would speak in reference to the PowerPoint. And we also, Dave submitted significant written comments that I hope you guys had an opportunity to
Him, the work that
he put many hours into them.
Except for the length.
But in light of those, we're not going to try to rehash a lot of that stuff. We may refer to some of those things. But if we'd like to present some PowerPoint presentation stuff that isn't directly in those materials, or maybe as a synthesis of some of that, and then just have some overall viewpoints that we'd like to share. So, I guess I'd begin by saying that the Warren Fork Meadow Property Owners Association is opposed to the variance request. They feel like they were kind of ambushed by the placement of those tanks in light of the approved site plan and lots of other factors. And I guess I'll begin by saying I think this application stands kind of in stark contrast to the first one you heard tonight. And you know, the core threshold question with variances, and I don't have to tell you guys this because you do it as part of your job every month, is, you know, the first threshold question is, do you have some kind of unusual property condition that inherently in the nature of variances isn't within the control of the applicant? And usually those are physical constraints, and that's what the code specifically refers to. Unusual narrowness, shallowness, unusual topographic conditions like we saw in the prior application, where you have very steep slopes, a narrow wedge-shaped line with an awkward one comes. And you know, this property presents the applicant with a problem because they've got an 8-acre rectangle that's flat. It doesn't have any of those kind of natural constraints. And so the application does a good job. It's clever. It presents the hardship as other conditions that have nothing to do with the nature of the property, having to do with the conditions put on it by design of a fire system or conditions of approval by the Board of County Commissioners, and other factors. They blame a lot of other things But when you look into it and really read the details, what becomes apparent is the primary constraint on this property is how they decide to design the buildings and their access and where their private drives are and how the buildings are configured on the site. And they say that was dictated by the Board of County Commissioners. Well, the Board of County Commissioners, as you guys know, they approve plans. They don't design plans. They approve the plan that these folks came up with. And I think that the timing element of this is really critical because what we heard tonight was some stuff that I hadn't really focused on or wasn't maybe quite aware of. But I'd like to start with spring of 2021, when they got their Board of County Commissioners approval. That approval has a condition in it that basically acknowledges that the fire design is not final. Part of their condition is to come up with a final design for a fire plan, including location of tanks. That's a express, I think it's mentioned in 2 different places in the Board of County Commissioners approval. They didn't spend a lot of time on that, obviously. They didn't take it that seriously. Then in January 2022, we heard John Melee say he identified this as a problem during the building permitting process, that the location of the tank wasn't going to work and they probably need more of them. So it looks like they went from maybe 1 10,000 gallon tank to 4 10,000 gallon tanks. And he indicated they were probably going to have to find a new location for them. That's in January 2022. And then building was going on that entire spring and summer before they apparently came up with a plan. Yet they kept building and they were building themselves out of options for where these tanks could go, is I think what happened. And so by the time they got to the point where kind of the rubber hit the road, when they have a stop work order because they've got wood up in the air, one building already framed and done, it sounds like, other buildings starting to come out of the ground. By that point, they've got no other place to go. And they get a planning department and the building department to approve a change order. They put the tanks in higher than they were supposed to. When you look at those plans that they showed to the building department and the planning department, the tanks were not going to violate anything. They were going to be 36 inches above grade within the 48 inches you would be permitted to have a burn. Well, they ended up not getting put that, that design didn't end up getting manifested in what was actually built. So then they have a problem where now they need a variance after the tanks are already in. So they've created a hardship. They're asking everybody else to bear the burden of it, including the neighbors who now have these tanks directly across the street from them with these big vents coming out. I'd like to also focus in on maybe a couple of other things. The historic grade question is an important one, and Chris rightfully pointed out, it's kind of the touchstone is where do we start measuring? Well, from what I've seen in the record, the staff has determined what the pre-existing historic grade was, and it's 6765. The applicant is saying, well, no, it's 67.2. So it's like a 26-inch difference, give or take.
That 65 you're talking about, it was an average between 64 and 66 in my.
Well,
Not for the county.
I'm not sure how the staff made their, and there are prior surveys that show in that range of 67, 65, and we actually have some in Dave's PowerPoint, but I kind of have a procedural question, I guess, maybe it's for Rye or for Joanna. Staff has said pre-existing grade is 67, 65. I have 2 questions. Is it the Board of Adjustments purview to second guess that based and change kind of the baseline from which the variance is being requested based on information provided by the applicant, or does that have to go back to an administrative decision by staff? Who decides where we start measuring? And I view the Board of Adjustments role as to determine whether variances should be granted, not where we start measuring them from. But that's just a question I have.
It's above my pay grade.
But it's an important question here because we're talking about a 2+ foot difference. And so when they talk about, we only need a 22-inch variance here, Well, if you go by staff's numbers, 22 inches becomes 44.5 inches. That they need a variance, if you follow my logic, it changes dramatically the amount of variance they need depending on where you start measuring from.
I think Chris indicated that he's going to the upper end of the variance request.
But he's starting at a higher point, so he doesn't need to get as many inches approved based on his math. He's being very conservative in the sense he's asking for 6 variances. And I understand why, because under the code, exactly what you need a variance for. When does grading become a berm and that kind of stuff? So he's asking for 6 variances. I get that. But in that sense, he's being very conservative. But from where he's starting to measure, he's saying staff is wrong. It's not 67, 65. SGM is right. It's 67, 67.2. Therefore, we've got 26 inches or so that we don't have to need a variance for because we're starting from a higher point for where historic grade was. And I don't know if that's right or not. It's a question I have. And 2 of his variances, 5 and 6, as you recall, are for the vents and the lids. And they're saying essentially that, okay, the standard rule in the county for setbacks is grade changes or improvements within a setback can't be more than 30 inches above historic grade. That's kind of a general rule. They're saying, well, that doesn't apply to things like mailboxes, utility pedestals, things that by their nature have to be next to the road and are in setbacks just as a matter of course, because they're just necessary for all development. They're saying the vents and the lids fall into that category, so they don't really need full variances for those. And we take issue with that. We think that you don't see vents and tank lids in every development, unlike, cable television pedestals or mailboxes. They are not necessary for every single project. I don't think, and it's another question for Rye or Joanna. What's the county's position on whether the lids and the vents need a variance from historic grade, in which case the vents need like an 8+ foot variance, or whether they just don't count. And in which case, I'm not even sure they would need a variance at all. But again, it's a question. I don't know the answer to it. And the final point I'd like to make kind of on the height of the vents issue is, I don't know if you noticed, but John Maley put a letter into the record that's part of your packet. It says, by the way, the vents aren't high enough. They need 48 inches of clearance from finish grade, I think, to account for snow. They're only 30-something inches from finished grade, and finished grade is only 6 inches on top of the tanks. And apparently, according to John's letter, what he was told when he did a site visit is they're going to be adding more soil on top of the tank so they can put landscaping on top of them, which will make the vents even closer to the ground. So the vents are going to have to get raised, by my math, something like 40 inches or so.
This would be necessitating another variance?
Well, I guess so. I guess would be back here again when they raise the vents and need a new variance. Because they haven't, and by the way, all the notices they've provided and posted are all based on, these specific numbers. They're assuming that the vents don't really count, so they don't need a full variance from historic grade for those. Same with the lids. They're assuming that they get to decide where the historic grade was. So they're counting from 26 inches higher than where staff thinks it is. So I'd like to get a better understanding of the county's position on who determines where historic grade starts, whether the notices are adequate, and depending on what the answer to that is, and what happens if, according to John Maley's letter, they raise the vents by another 40 inches to create the clearance they need. Are they going to need more variances? So I realize I've thrown a lot out, but it's just, there are questions that I don't think there are answers to.
Well, before I have Chris respond to your remarks.
And I'd like to give Dave a chance for his PowerPoint too. And maybe we could wrap that up and then come back to it, unless anybody that has a
I'm
okay with questions during the thing too.
My
I do
question-
have a little, I left my hearing aids in a dish on the counter, so
One,
so I have trouble hearing, so if I'm leaning in,
so
please speak.
to get to a win-win situation here, and what I'd like to know is, what is your objective in objecting to this project? Is there something that they could do to alleviate your concerns? Or ameliorate your concerns?
Well, Chris and I said we didn't meet, but we did meet at the site. And he asked me if we would waive the variances, and I said, I can't do that. I mean, we've got, I've got other neighbors, there's there's 4 associations around. So I said, I can't do that. Our objection is, and concern is, they've made a lot of changes on the site. And we have private covenants with them that they've totally ignored. That concerns us. The private covenants have certain things that they were supposed to do, and they've totally ignored us. That concerns us greatly. These tanks, and of course, I'd rather kind of stick with the power presentation, but the tanks and vents, they're ugly. And it's right at the entrance of our development. And so every day we and our guests and friends have to drive by and see these tank vents and everything sticking on the ground. And we shouldn't have to bear that responsibility.
Well, I don't want to point out the obvious, but what if they agree to shield or somehow hide these things that are troublesome to you? I know there may be
Yeah.
other issues. that
Yeah.
you're concerned
What do we do? I know
That's a
that,
major
what do we do about the park issue? I know Mary quoted the VOCC statement about not being open to the public. What she didn't say is what that was in relation to was the fact that Emma Fields wanted to have tastings. And we fought that tremendously because we didn't want a lot of traffic coming in. You know, this is a residential neighborhood, and there's 16,000 square foot of manufacturing facility in a residential neighborhood, and we did not want a tasting.
But that's addressed in the resolution.
No. So Mary made that comment about the park. And when this first started, this is another thing that the source subject, they came to us and they sold us on this great facilities, do leads, and they were going to have this community. In fact, it was even labeled a community park at that point. It has a separate entrance outside their gate. And so obviously it was intended to be used for the public. Now they've told us that that was not the case, but that's what they represent. It was flat. And what Mary quotes about the VOC saying not open to the public had to do with their buildings and having to do with tastings. It didn't have to do with that site, the park. So did that answer your question? I'm sorry.
What are some of the other concerns that you?
Well, here's the thing. Chris made a statement that fire suppression is very important to them. They've removed the fire sprinklers from their buildings. That's a great concern to our neighborhood. They could do that because unfortunately, under the 2015 building codes, they could lower the size of their buildings and remove fire sprinklers, because I think you brought up the point that if it's over 5,000 square feet. So they lowered the building under 5,000 square feet so they could remove the fire sprinklers. Under the 2021 codes, which unfortunately Pitkin County Building had not adopted yet when they went through approvals,
under the current codes, it is required by their use that they have fire sprinklers in the building. So we are very concerned. This is a manufacturing facility. They're manufacturing volatile chemicals. And you've all heard about instances where a petroleum in a river's been on fire. Well, water doesn't do a very good job of suppressing the type of fire that might happen with their facility. But if they're so concerned about the neighbors and fire suppression, why did they remove their sprinklers from the building? That's one of the biggest items. I think that pretty well addressed the biggest item. Having a look at that, the fact that they removed the fire sprinklers. Well, they've made a lot of changes. They're supposed to come to us and get approval of materials. They changed the materials on the building without even asking us. They put electrical equipment on the building facing our development, which they were supposed to get approval for that type of thing, and they didn't. In fact, what's really kind of was disturbing to us was in the annual report to the BOCC that was written by I think Chris, or that it says that that they had been in regular contact with the neighbors, and they also made a claim that there had been no neighbor complaints. Well, there have been plenty of neighbor complaints, one of which was mine in writing in December of 2022 about the tanks. And I know that from the other neighboring association, they've been complaining about noise being construction activities beyond the hours that they were permitted to operate. And but yet their annual report said that there have been no complaints, and it said that they had been in regular contact with us, which they hadn't. There had been no contact during this period. In fact, in my report, we're going through it, but we hired 2 engineers that looked for alternative locations for the tanks, and they came up with 2 very good locations for the tanks. I believe that the Emma Fields really did not look at alternative locations. That was convenient for them. The tanks arrived on site. They had construction going on elsewhere on the site. So let's put them there. And that's what happened. Another thing that happened is, I'll show this copy to you, is that they obtained Pitkin County approval for the tanks on that site. The planning approved it, and building department approved it. If they had put the tanks in as they promised, the Pitkin County planning, we wouldn't be here today, because the grade change, which is, thank you for bringing that up. The grade change, if you'll notice from that, is 36 inches. It would have been below the amount required that they could put a 36-inch berm there, and we wouldn't be here tonight. But they didn't build it as they told Pitkin County they're going to build it. And why are we here? Because they didn't.
I'm going to give this side an opportunity to respond to some of your concerns and see if there's a way we can resolve some of your concerns. I don't know, do you want to respond?
Well, I just had one comment I just want to make for the record, that we are here tonight about the variance requests that are being made by the applicant. And I do understand that Mr. Hodgkin has several other concerns with the project. And perhaps the applicant, himself and their relationship, but, the Board of Adjustments just to be looking at the variant application, and some of these other issues are outside of the scope of the hearing.
I don't think we can separate those two. I don't think we can separate those, because they're all part and parcel of the fact that Emma Fields made a lot of promises to the community and the neighbors, and they totally ignored it. So to say that we'll talk about that later, it doesn't compute to us.
Well, she does raise a good point. I mean, I'm here to give a.
I understand you can't.
Variance, based on the facts presented and, some of these other issues can be done as a sidebar. But Chris, I'll give you an opportunity to respond to,
Thank you. Before I do, I want to make sure that Mr. Hodgkin has gone. I know you wanted to provide a presentation.
No, you're, go ahead. Yeah,
Okay.
that's fine.
Thanks. First of all, I think we have established that there are some unusual circumstances that have happened on this property. Not just a matter of having an 8-acre blank slate, but we do have a series of things that have happened. I think John Melee addressed this issue where we thought we had a plan that met all the specifications and requirements and so on. That shifted on us. We needed to find a new location for these tanks. We went through all the processes, right? First thing you do when you got to change, you figure out, okay, call the county. What do we need to do? This is what you need to do. Apply for this change order. Change order goes through with its process. We relied on that and built based on that. We've provided measurements to this, to maybe to Bart's question. When we got further into this, we know we needed to get more precise about exactly what was happening out there, and get down to 1/10 of a foot. And we've provided the measurements both in terms of offset from what we believe is the pre-development grade conditions, but also elevations above mean sea level. I mean, at some point, that's the sort of unifying, here's exactly where they are in measurement against mean sea level, which is sort of a universal thing, right? So we've provided those in both of those terms. And again, following staff direction around, what is an acceptable process of determining a pre-development grade. This comes up in a lot of projects. And so SGM and other surveyors are used to going through that process to figure out what is an accurate pre-development grade. Mary Elizabeth did comment that we do have private covenants. The Board of Adjustment, you maybe feel sort of fortunate for this, is not the venue to debate the meaning and applicability of those covenants. I did meet with Mr. Hodgkin, and as we do on a lot of properties, a lot of projects where we have neighbors that are not fully satisfied with what's proposed or what's going on, et cetera, to try to get to some common understanding of what the objections were and what we could do about them. And it's no different than conversations with other neighbors. Construction's not the most pleasant thing to be next to. Mr. Patel has had those conversations with neighbors and changed things and to try to accommodate neighbors best we could. So I had the conversation I think you were trying to engage Mr. Hodgkin in. Certainly get the unsightliness issue. That's something that we could take care of. I do take a little bit of a different position on the public park. It's not a public park. There was maybe some confusion because there was a prior application that was submitted to the county on this property that was then withdrawn. But the current application and the current approval has no requirement for a public park. If that is something that Mr. Hodgkin is looking for and resolves his overall grievance, I mean, that's a conversation that we can have. We have not necessarily any quarrel with the public, but it's not, we want to be clear that there's no obligation that there's a public park here. We did not remove, quote unquote, remove fire suppression systems. They were never in the plan. They were not avoiding codes. The fire suppression system requirements are the same now as they would be in prior codes. And as you heard Mr. Melee speak to, we tried to be as responsive as we could to the fire marshal's sort of technical considerations, as well as his practical considerations, right? I mean, he has codes and so on to administer. All codes are written in a minimal way. You need your minimum requirements are to do this. But he has other practical considerations of providing fire suppression for a neighborhood that has minimal or no fire suppression capabilities otherwise. And we've been trying to be responsive to that as we can be. I do disagree, and I spoke to this in the presentation about the other locations that would work. Again, I think that's a theoretical exercise without a stamp or a warranty or any real skin in the game behind it, as opposed to our submission, which is fully designed, has gone through the permitting process, and is something that you have professionals standing behind. And I think those are two really different positions. Overall, I think we understand that Mr. Hotchkin has some general grievances with the project, and maybe how it's been deployed. And we would, we try to engage and what kind of things can we do to alleviate at least some of those. We're still open to all those conversations. We'd still need a variance, but we're going to have an operation in this neighborhood. Mr. Hotchkins can continue to be in this neighborhood. He's going to be driving by it, and we're going to be there. We want to have a good neighbor relationship. We think we've established that in our practices with other neighbors, and we would seek that again with Mr. Hotchkin. It's unfortunate that you're hearing all this stuff being impacted in front of you. It's not necessarily your roles to try to manage neighborhood relationship. I fully understand what you're trying to do. I think I'm on the same page. But we do have, an application in front of you that we think meets your standards and addresses what we see as unusual circumstances that would otherwise create a hardship upon the owner. Again, at the appropriate moment, I do have two letters very quick from neighbors that I would like to enter into the record.
Please do.
The first is from Randy Utz, who's a neighbor of the property, and I believe a member of the covenant that is within the neighborhood. Chris and Matt, I wanted to confirm a few items that we have discussed on the phone and you asked me to put into an email. First, your communications with us as a neighbor of the Emma Fields property are appreciated. We've discussed various matters and reached resolution. You've been forthright with us, and your professionalism has enabled a reasonable, rational discussion focused on outcomes rather than personalities or perceived motivations. We appreciate your approach and value you as a neighbor. Second is to let you know that we value the location and sizing of the water suppression tanks. Locating these close to Hoagland Ranch Road allows the fire department to access them if there's a fire in the neighborhood. Sizing them for more than just your needs provides extra firefighting safety for surrounding properties. You could have focused solely on your own interest, which is your right. The choices you made benefit the neighborhood and serve more than just your interest. That is commendable. To the extent my comments are helpful to you, please share them with the appropriate parties. We look forward to continued good neighbor relations. If you have any questions, please contact me at your convenience. That's from Randy Utz.
Can you please spell that last name?
UTZ, like the bags of chips.
It's just like.
The second and final is from Zach Pritchett, also a neighbor, and I believe also a member of the covenant. Hi, Matt. Wanted to thank you for listening to us and addressing our concerns about the distillery development. I realize you have made compromises and the outcome is maybe not perfect or ideal to you. But addressing our issues to our satisfaction is admirable, and we are happy with the result. In particular, the way you handled the issue made it easy to get through. Also want to counter some of the friction you've been receiving regarding the water tanks. After our discussion and learning more about the size and purpose of these tanks, I can see the benefit to the firefighting ability in the neighborhood. We are all concerned about wildfire risk, and these tanks help provide better defense against an event, whether it be on your property or another property in the area. Thank you for installing these. I'm sure you and others are looking forward to being finished with the construction. While construction is a messy enterprise, and I'm looking forward to the project being done, I think you've done a good job overall. Please stay in touch. You can share my comments with county officials.
Are you gonna submit?
Just a clarification, they aren't part of our
I can email them as
development.
well.
They're in the vicinity of the project.
Yeah,
They are parties to the covenant agreement,
right.
but they're not in the Roaring Fork
Yeah.
Meadows.
See,
Covenant for the area.
yeah, I used to own that subdivision, and then in the process of the development, we recorded the private covenants in the property I used to own and the Roaring Fork Meadows. And then I sold off that property to these two people. So
Chris, are you?
maybe they thought I paid too much.
David an opportunity to.
I am.
Respond. You have the floor if you'd like.
Okay,
I'm gonna go to some specific slides.
yeah, let's go to Pacific. Let's
We've covered a lot of this.
yeah, let's go to this one first. Maybe that's 4. Right. This really addresses the request for Emma Fields to raise the grade. First of all, they mentioned that they had a better survey. I believe the same surveyor did the one that they're relying on now and the one that they used for the pre-development. So there's really no change in the surveyor. They're both SGM. So to say that they had a better surveyor is not really true. But where they got this grade is, if you look at the chart on the left, they average two numbers, 6766 and 6768. Well, where they got 6768 is that brown line up there in the top. And you see it's not really even in the tank area. And so the question I really have is, if you're really taking different gradients, why didn't you take 6763 and 6764, which are the blue and the green lines? Well, the obvious reason for that is they were looking for a way to raise the grade, and they chose a grade that they wanted to use, and it wasn't even in the area, the brown one up there with the arrow. So realistically, they made an agreement with Pitkin County and the building department. The building department plans say right on it, the grade is 6764.5. And if you look at Pitkin County's planning department, the one on the right that they submitted to the planning department, that grade is 6765. So, I mean, in my business, you make a handshake and you make an agreement. You don't come back just because you made a mistake in the tanks and say, oh, by the way, we want to figure out a way to make a higher grade. And that's exactly what they did. So if you take the variances that they're asking for, even if you use their grades that they want to use now, the public notice and what they're requesting for is their variances are greater than what they're asking for, even under their current or even under their new grades that they're asking for. So as Bart says, how do we handle that? You're being asked to approve something that isn't exactly true on site. What's
Chris, you want to respond to that? We
I
don't want to see you come back again.
Yeah,
Chris, I don't know if Luke is still on the phone, he might be able to speak.
yeah, I'll start and then Luke may be able to jump in if he's on. You know, I think, again, we didn't change surveyors. We said we need to get a higher level of precision here. The grades or the elevations above mean sea level are actual and they're to 1/10 of a foot. So that is about as precise as we could expect. And is accurate to what's out there and what is before you.
So in other words, you won't be coming back for a amended variance request.
There could be one open item, which is the height of the vent
Events.
apparatus itself. There are, there's a conversation there about what the appropriate height of those can be. We want to keep them as low as possible, I think for the same reason that Mr. Hodgkin would want them as low as possible, to make them as least obtrusive as possible. We also need to make sure that they function 100% as they need to. So we hope to not come back, certainly. We have in front of you what we think is necessary for the project to be able to move forward without having to come back to the BOA.
Well, I understand that we're charged with giving a minimal variance, but again, to accommodate, if you're talking about another foot, why would you ask for that now? Even though you may not need it.
We're not, we're asking for what we feel is the least amount of variance necessary to alleviate otherwise the hardship on the property owner.
I'd just like to, I'll speak to that first, and then there were a couple of other things that were said that if I could have a chance to speak to, but I think what Chris was saying is you have 6 requests in front of you. 2 have to do with the location of the tanks within a setback. When the change order was issued by the county, they was specifically issued saying no amendment to the site plan needed, and there was no discussion about this being a setback problem. We are asking for those to just be 150% sure that there is no issue with having buried tanks within the setback. But those don't have anything to do with height. So then the next 4 have to do with height, which I think is really what you guys are concerned about, because I understand, because we are talking about inches here. The requests 3, 4, and 5, I think as Chris was saying, do have, do get us where we need to be on everything. And then to your point, the last variance request about the vents being 38 inches and Mr. Mealy's comment and recommendation or potential requirement that be 48. I guess tonight, if the board does, well, if tonight, if that is an issue that the board doesn't feel comfortable going with, we would still ask that you look at the 5, 1 through 5, and maybe number 6 might have to be a standalone that we may need to come back depending on how, that conversation with Mr. Mealy goes. And then just to back up just a little bit, I know Mr. Johnson, was saying that this threshold matter, this doesn't meet the standard for a variance because there's no topographical problem. As Chris pointed out, and I just want to emphasize that variance standard talks about topography and shape, but then goes on to say, or other situations or conditions. And just want to be clear, we're talking about that, situation or condition. And as far as also talking about, who makes the decision whether or not, or where the pre-development grade is, what that is it 67, 65, is it 67, 72.2, which is what SGM came up with. I don't know, and I would look to staff to correct me if I'm wrong. I'm not sure that the county has actually gone out and surveyed this parcel and has actual recent survey data to set that. And my experience has been that usually you look to the applicant to provide that survey information.
This is Matthew Patel. If I could just make a comment on the height of this.
Hang on. Are you requesting to speak, Mr. Patel?
All right, while they're having that discussion, I want to clean up the record just a little bit. Richard Neely, I'm the Assistant County Attorney. So of course, the board needs to meet the standards for granting those variants that you all are familiar with. Assuming those standards are met, the only variants that the Board of Adjustment can grant are what is in this public notice right now that they presented.
These are the 6 outlined here.
Yes, and to the heights and the exact heights and all that kind of stuff. So what they've been noticed is insufficient to serve the proposed development. They will have to come back and get another variance from this board. So I just want to clear that up.
Thank you.
Right, can I ask one clarifying question? For variance requests 5 and 6, does the county have a position on whether these vents and lids are exempt from the 30-inch requirement, like a mailbox would be? Or a cable television pedestal, or are they improvements within the setback that are subject to the 30-inch limit above historic grade?
I'd have to defer to staff on that. I don't know.
Because I think it's kind of a fundamental question about what the variances under 5 and 6 are for. Because they're basically treating them as exempt as.
No, we're not.
Disagree, we're asking for variances because we're not treating them as exempt. If they were exempt, we would.
But you're measuring them from finished grade, and the requirement is 30 inches from historic grade. So you're asking for a variance for.
Again, they are seeking the variance for what is in the notice. If the variance that they are seeking is insufficient to meet the standards of the code for the development that is proposed, then they will need to pursue a different variance or an additional variance.
Can I ask a question? If the board approves a variance that later turns out to be unnecessary or is redundant, is there any hazard there? Is any impediment moving forward?
Yes, my position on that would be that if the variance was granted and it was sufficient to accommodate the development that was being proposed, if there was another development or another variance granted that was unnecessary to accommodate the development, then it wouldn't be necessary.
So we've asked for and probably over noticed and over asked for every situation. It might be grading, it may be a berm, we've asked for both. There may be a setback, it may be a height, we've asked for both. We've described things in elevation above mean sea level and in relationship to the existing grade and in relationship to the pre-development grade, the finished grade and the pre-development grade. So, there's some redundancy there. We may end up having a variance that you consider and grant that turns out we didn't actually need. But that's a safer position for us to be in than asking for less than what we need to move forward.
Yeah. Okay. Seth Orlowski, on board here. We're used to seeing applications come in for things that aren't built yet. Usually that's how it happens. Occasionally something comes in and it's built. So I'm trying to figure out how the timeline worked and how we got here. And I'm looking at this and what's this design here? Was that the change order?
No,
That stays.
yes, okay. My presentation's been kind of
Okay.
interrupted.
But I've seen this little teardrop thing
Yeah.
on yours as well, Chris, right? You have that on the,
No,
With
it's
the red.
visible different.
you have all the red on there? I guess maybe the question is,
Yeah.
what was the change order that got approved from the county
Mhm.
versus what was installed? Like, what does that look like?
The change order that was issued by the county is for the change in location of the water tanks and the water and the fire hydrant. So it was in the back corner of the property.
Yeah.
The fire marshal said, I can't have it there for the obvious reasons that we've discussed. I need it closer to the entrance to the property. So that hydrant was relocated and those tanks needed to be very close to where that hydrant is. That's the change order that, with, a better understanding from the fire marshal, we applied to the county. That change order was approved and those tanks were installed. The reason we're in front of you is that the tanks are higher elevation wise than what was in that change order and necessitate a variance for those heights. So that's why we're in front of you. That's the reason why they're there. And if they and the heights relate to what you heard Mr. Melee describe in terms of the draw depth and so on that you need to operate these things so that it all works, which is obviously the sort of commanding principle here. So, but that's how we got here.
Okay. Yeah, I understand the whole process with what John was saying, but you think this location works and during land use it gets through, you gotta figure it out. So I understand the moving part. So did the change order have a design in it with elevations of the tank and then in the field it got moved, or like just trying to figure out like what the county approved in the change order and why it needs variance now? Like, was that information not part of the actual change order, all of that?
I don't think there was the
I have
level
that
of
in my
precision.
presentation, by the way, if you'd like to see.
Well, that's what I'm trying to figure out.
I think one thing I can add, there is a letter from staff, that talks about that change order did the location, which I think we're all clear on. But then it was to include that understanding these are gonna be buried, that there's gonna be some mounding or berming, that berm would be 48 inches. From a restored grade to 67, 65, which then starts to go back to what's the existing grade. So that's where we thought we were. When Mr. Hodgkin raised an issue this summer, believing that, maybe these actually did not fit within those parameters. Then we started down the road of, getting SGM back out there, getting the precise survey, realizing that, oh, you know what, actually there is a discrepancy. So we do need to go get the variance. Does that make sense? We did, so it was. So the change order did include and recognize some burning and mounding and that, but at that point that a variance wouldn't have been necessary. And if this is a berm, the request is only a 4-inch difference.
So the berming and mounding, that representation to the county ended up being a little different than what was actually installed.
Yeah, by 5 feet.
Or 4 inches.
No, by 5 feet.
Okay. 5 feet. And the design that you talk about with all these engineers and everything, that took place with the change order that went into the county, not after.
Correct. Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
This is a photo of the tanks. This was no mistake. This is a photo of the tanks before they were buried. There is a 10-foot ladder sticking out of the tank. And there's one leaning against the side. And the regulation for a step is 12 inches. So you can see that those tanks are only buried by about 3 feet. The approvals from the county that they received, and that's an 8-foot tall tank without the soil on top. Yeah, the red line up the top shows where the soil is supposed to be. The approvals from the change order, approvals from the county was to have a 36-inch change in grade. That's 11 feet. So that was not a mistake. That was not a whoops. we missed the grade by a little bit. They missed it by 7 feet.
Did somebody from the county sign off on this?
I don't know. I don't know. We raised the issue when we saw the grade. And the county went and consulted with Matthew. And they came back and said it was just a restoration of the grade. We then further protested and say, wait a minute, this is not just a restoration. There's something going on here. Someone needs to do a survey. And then that's when the county required Emma Fields to do a survey. And that's when they said, wow, okay, you're right, there is something going on here. Because they were supposed to be, we wouldn't be here tonight if they had built it according to, they were supposed to build it. And we have engineers that actually have 2 locations, one of which is right in the front of the property, better than their location, and it puts a fire hydrant on the street. And theirs is down the driveway. You want to pull up that slide?
Yeah, I'd suggest that
Can I finish, please? Can I finish? So if you look at this diagram, we had 2 engineers look at it. It's in the written material that we supply. And they came up with alternate tank 1 and alternate 2. And both the first one that's in front of the buildings towards the street there works with the current fire hydrant. And if you see the white lines there, we could actually put a fire hydrant on the street outside their gate. Their fire hydrant is down the driveway inside the gate. And so this design was actually better than what they have. And it's closer to the street and it's outside the setbacks and it doesn't interfere with the private covenants that required landscaping in front of it. So Emma Fields obviously did not look at alternative locations. If they had, they would have come up with some better ones and they would not have had to raise the grade that they did. I believe that the only reason they raised grades they did is someone made one of their engineers made a really big faux pas mistake. And because their design shows these tanks meeting code. And then when they got the tanks there and started to install them, they discovered, their engineers, that the hydraulics did not work. And so what they did to make them work is they raised the tanks out of the ground and hoping that no one would notice. Well, we did, and that's why we're here.
Again, I have to object. This is not a design that's been prepared and does not have any warranty of any stamp behind it. One of these tank locations is underneath a building. There are lines in here that are way too long for the fire hydrant to work. The fire suppression systems engineer that we employed, as well as our other design team members, have put forward a proposal that has the full warranty and guarantee of the stamp and licensure behind it. It's gone through all the approvals with the fire marshal. None of what Mr. Hushkin is suggesting is anything more than just theory. He's not a fire suppression engineer. He's showing you a map that, these locations do not work. I'd ask if we could get Deborah Shaner, Ms. Shaner, to comment on these, because this is nothing more than just hypothetical nonsense of imaginary locations of water tanks put forward by a person who has no credible experience or education in designing a fire suppression system.
Engineers had no.
There is no stamp, there is no warranty, there's no guarantee, there's no permit, there's no review, there's no approvals, there's no nothing. This is a drawing. That's what this is. If you can, I'd love for Ms. Shaner to address this point because she is a qualified fire suppression systems engineer.
I would not object to tabling this to bring in more testimony from your expert.
She's on the line.
She's online.
Just want to comment.
She's ready if you want to.
Deborah, you're more than welcome to unmute.
Thank you. I apologize, everybody. I'm not there, but as you can probably hear in my voice, in the interest of public health, I needed to quarantine myself to my office here. So I do apologize for that. I had planned to be there. Thanks again for having me. I am Deborah Shaner, and my technical title is fire protection engineer, and I think that's important because Mr. Hodgkins is exactly correct in that all these things are related to each other. I didn't come in just to design the NFPA 1142 water supply or to come in just to, decide if the building needed to be sprinklered. We basically, because of the constraints of 1142 and the applicability of it, we were required to do an assessment and a life safety report, which I did. There's a set of drawings. There's 300 hours worth of my time into this. So any suggestion that we didn't do the fire protection work is absolutely not correct. This has been going on for a while. So I'm not sure if you want me just to kind of talk to this slide, or did you have some other questions? What would you? I know we're all getting tired. So what would you like me to speak to this? Would that be helpful?
Well, there's. Can you address whether this design or set of designs has any regulatory status with the fire department?
Absolutely. So, one thing I do want to say is, I don't know if Fire Marshal Melly is still in the room, but the respect goes both ways there. And we've known each other for a really long time, and we've done a lot of work together. So this was, like he said, a normal process. This was not out of the ordinary. Things change with fire protection all the time. And sometimes it really is, as sites are coming together, when you start looking at access and, and just how the fire protection comes together, it changes a lot. This is not abnormal to me. But what is obviously there's some concern about this, and there's some pushback from the neighbors. So we want to try to make, I want them to feel good about this fire safety design and that this is an enhancement to their neighborhood. But one thing I will start with is when we, John Melly placed the dry hydrant, and then we placed the tank to accommodate the dry hydrant. And I can assure you, again, I don't know if he's still in the room or not, I'm not sure, but he doesn't want that hydrant in the street. That hydrant shouldn't be in the street. There are other things that come into play. So Roaring Fork Fire District has quite an extensive packet that they put out for these non-traditional, non-municipal water supplies. And besides, the tank location and the lines that were drawn here in the hydrant, let's just start with that. First of all, the hose lays are way too long. These dry hydrants, for those of you that aren't familiar with them, I know the Board of Adjustments has a lot of civil engineering type experience, but for those in the room that aren't, these dry hydrants, it's kind of like sucking out of a straw. They're not pressurized water systems. And even if you have a little positive pressure, it's still like you're sucking through a straw. So the fire truck in its pump is your mouth, sucking that water from the tank through the pipe. So we have a very standard industry standard of about 10 foot of head, 10 foot of vertical lift. Well, every time you go 50 feet horizontally, that equates to a certain amount of vertical lift. If you think about the straw example, when you get a kink in your straw, kind of messes up how much soda you're going to get in your mouth. And that's the same principle here. Not to dumb it down, but that is exactly what we had to overcome. So the hydraulics alone, we have 3 or 4 pages of calculations from a mechanical and plumbing engineer that used the Darcy-Weisbach formula to demonstrate the friction loss. And we calculated it before we got, before it was in the design. These are too long. There's other things like truck parking. The fire truck has to have a 10 by 40 space for it to park. They can't block emergency access to things like ambulances or egress from the site. So one of the constraints, probably the biggest constraint for us besides the hydraulics, was that truck parking. And that was the fire marshal and I worked together to find that, but that was something that was really important to him. He doesn't want it in the street. that hydrant has to be a certain hose lay from every single building corner on that property. And it'll have to be on inside the gate. So we did go through this. Even we talked about putting it just on the other side of Distillers Road. And that was not something that was of interest, because then again, you got hose across the street, and we were afraid it was going to get, it would be driven on and whatnot. And that's just how fire department staging works. So that there's a little more to it than just a tank and a pipeline. And I would be happy to look at if these are calculated out to comment, but based on our hydraulic calculations, the constraints of the Roaring Fork Fire Department, the fire code, staging, truck parking, access, and hose lay requirements, we did pick the best location, and there isn't a better location.
And in your opinion, Ms. Shaner,
Yeah.
when you're looking at these, and I know you haven't had a chance to review the engineering calculations and so on, to the extent that they may or may not actually exist. In these alternate tank location 1 and alternate tank location 2, can you just talk to the things that inherently are flawed with the location of those, either the distance, the expected hydraulic friction that you may get in those distance of those runs, the inability for the tanks to be refilled if there is an event going on and needing to drive by a building. The fact that at least one tank location appears to be underneath a building. Are there those things that you can identify that may sort of in a simplistic way identify the fatal flaws with these 2 alternate locations?
I think I can, though, but I'm not going to go that far, because to me, there was one fatal flaw at the very beginning. It's too far away, and there's too many bends in the straw, if you will. And so I wouldn't, tank number 1 and the location of any of those dry hydrants would never work. It will never calculate out. I don't care if there's a little bit of positive pressure. I don't think there's anything wrong with these tank locations, and I'm certainly not discounting the very reputable civil engineers that drew this, but I think they were looking at it from one assignment of, is there another place to put these tanks on this site? And their answer was yes, sure there are. But there's not another place to put these tanks on this site when the dry hydrant had to be where it was mandated to be.
And in your experience, Ms. Shaner, when you are locating a tank, do you look for what serves the most minimal compliance, or do you look for an optimal location that is the not just meeting the minimum, but exceeding the minimum?
Thank you for that question. I pride myself on not designing jobs with minimal compliance. That's what design build contractors are for. I pride myself on being a well-rounded fire protection engineer that can look at a multitude of things. And if we need to talk, about the fire sprinklers or the fire suppression or what the fire protection plan looks like, I can talk about that on command if need be. But for this particular issue, an NFPA 1142 is kind of a performance standard. And for whatever it's worth, I know my resume's out there, but I'm the National Fire Protection Association's technical chair of that committee. I've been on it for 3 cycles. So I am sitting with the brilliant minds that are writing this code and debating it. And I understand what the standard is. And there's some minimums, but it's more there's performance criteria. And the point of it is to get the most effective, fast fire protection system that you can. And this particular standard, like I said, the hardship for this site was lack of water. That is the hardship. That was when I first walked on this job, I'm like, boy, there's no water. So the hardship for the site was lack of water, period. So what do we do then? Well, we create an NFPA 1142 water supply because we could not comply with the International Fire Code. International Fire Code quoted to 1142. So we did design to the standard of 1142, but we also, like you mentioned earlier, was a brilliant sentence that besides compliance, we also looked at practicality. And John Melly is notorious for that, for applying, because he's so well versed in the codes. It's not code minimum, it's what's best for the site. And that's what we did.
And Ms. Shaner,
sure.
To submit a qualified fire suppression plan to the fire district, What are the qualifications that are required of that person, the designer?
In this particular fire protection plan, would you say?
Yeah, and it's maybe unfair to ask you. It's maybe a question for Mr. Melee, but in your experience, what is sort of what are the qualifications of the person who's laying out and designing the fire suppression system?
Well, I mean, if you're asking for what a fire protection engineer's qualifications are, there's a very specific definition of that. I have a master's degree in fire protection engineering from the University of Maryland, and that qualifies me to do that. So, I mean, that's one way to get there. There's also plenty of other NICET certifications and whatnot to get you into fire suppression design. But in this particular case, especially when you're talking about private water supplies, pressurized or not, and this is probably applicable to municipal water supplies. Yeah, you get your fire protection engineer and that comes in and says, this is how big the tank is, and these are all the criteria for the fire department. You've also got a plumbing engineer that's doing the friction loss calcs and choosing the exact correct pipe to use to make it, and elbows and fittings to make it, efficient. We had landscape architects, civil engineer, mechanical engineer, plumbing engineer, and fire protection engineer looking at that. So that's a lot of degrees and a lot of PE stamps sitting in that room.
Thank you.
I have a couple questions.
Thank you, Kit. Sorry for my scratchy voice.
You said that Fire Marshal Melee selected the location of the fire hydrant. Is that correct? Yeah, I think you said that.
Yeah, it wasn't just he said, here it is. We had a collaborative effort, but yeah.
But I have correspondence that I sent out earlier where he's responded to an email saying that he did not have any selection at all of where the hydrant of the tanks are located. So is that something you're?
I'm not aware of that email.
Right.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that. It's actually our responsibility to place the hydrant. So where that email goes, however, the design, we approve a design that's submitted by that fire protection or the project. So we do have a say where that hydrant goes. We did pick that hydrant location. We also worked with the developer to make sure that hydrant could be placed there and wouldn't interfere with some other things that were going on with the project. But it suited us where it was fine. And so I don't know, I don't mean to mislead Mr. Hodgkins, but that was our choice. We did that and we proved that decision.
Thank you for that.
Okay.
Can I ask Mr.
Deborah, did you design the system that's in place now? Did you design it?
Not individually, no. It was, like I mentioned earlier, a collaborative effort between 6 different disciplines.
Who did the schematics? Who did that work?
Again, a mechanical engineer, a plumbing engineer, a fire protection engineer, an architect, a landscape architect, and a civil engineer.
You're the fire protection engineer?
I'm sorry, what?
She is. Just made
Yes,
that clear.
Yeah.
Can I?
Excuse me, let me finish. If you were involved in designing the system and you submitted a plan to Pitkin County that said there's only be a 36-inch change in grade, why did there end up being a 7-foot change in grade?
I don't think that's what Ms. Shaner has represented. I think we've been very clear as to the timeline here. I did want to ask.
Let's address the timeline.
Well, but I did want to ask Mr. Melee.
This is my presentation, really. I mean, that's being.
Well,
let's address the
I
timeline.
think I would just ask to interrupt for a minute. To Rye, it's really unusual to have a public comment then engaging with the applicant's experts. Typically, public comment is given to a board, but not an engaging conversation with applicant and.
Yeah, I agree. It's kind of unusual. The chair has provided some leeway in this circumstance to conduct the hearing as he sees fit. At some point, we should probably bring it back to what we're trying to do here, which is determine if there's a variance or not, and whether the site is variance for the site is warranted. I would suggest, given the length of time that the applicant has had so far, I know that Mr. Hodgkin has a couple more points that he probably wants to make. I would allow him to, I would suggest to the chair that they allow him to make that, and then we can move ahead from there. Likely close public comment, but the chair and the board have the discretion to conduct the hearing as they want.
In fairness to both parties, I want to give you an opportunity to finish your comments and your objections, and we'll wrap this up and we'll make a decision tonight.
I appreciate it. It's kind of felt that it's a debate, but it shouldn't be. You want to talk about your?
Sure, I think we've covered what we wanted to with the PowerPoints. I want to just bring it back around to, I think, the timeline and get away from kind of the battle of expertise over where tanks could go. I think this site plan is actually illustrative for another reason. And I'd like to bring it back to the timeline that, first of all, the Board of County Commissioners approval in 2021 made final design of the fire tanks in that system a condition that the applicant would have to satisfy. They started submitting building permits. This issue came up, according to the fire marshal, in January 2022, when this issue was identified. And yet the applicant decided, they made a business decision, which maybe was a rational one at the time, to build their buildings where they had proposed them, and made all of that sacrosanct and basically off limits for dealing with the fire tank issue. They made that decision. They created a situation where they were gonna, according to their own expert, be in a position where they have to put the tank now in a setback that they would have known about. I mean, it's right on the plan that there's a required setback, but they kept building the buildings and put off dealing with the tank hydrant issue and didn't have that finally designed until fall of that year. So they went months of building buildings and maybe not being as urgent about the tank issue as they should have been. And then they got to the point where Mr. Mealy had to tell them you can't work anymore. And then they had to rush and put the tanks in. And so they got a change order approved and they put them in. But by that point, they had already had all these buildings under development. I think it's a hardship created by the applicant.
All due respect, we're beating a dead horse.
Yeah, and
I want to bring this back.
That concludes our presentation.
Get some resolution to this variance request tonight. There was a time there earlier where I thought maybe we may have to table this to go do a site inspection, but I might personally have heard enough. And I'm prepared to make a motion to either have one of my associates make a motion. And I suspect that we will wind up in court or before the county commissioner, one way or the other, no matter what we do tonight. So I think I've given both parties an opportunity to express their views. And without objection, I would like to bring this to a vote.
Chair, if you don't mind, may I ask a question of the county attorney real quick?
Certainly.
Just as to process for the motion and voting. Rye, would it be appropriate to have a motion and vote on each separate variance request?
I don't think that makes any sense whatsoever.
Okay.
Well, actually,
The only reason I asked that is.
to approve the variance, or there's 6 different variances that are requested. I think
if we defeat any one of them, it's like denying the whole.
Well, I guess somebody could make a motion to approve them all or deny them all, if that's what they're gonna do. I would suggest that the board check and make sure whether there's any other members of the public that would like to make public comment. And then probably close the public comment for tonight, or the public hearing.
I've asked, thanks, Mr. Neely. I have asked if there's any other public comment, and hearing none.
And we have no one online to comment.
All right, I'd like to close the public portion of this hearing and deliberate with my associates. And see if we can come up with names. Seth, you got any comments?
I'm still trying to wrap my head around how they installed the way it did with the changeover.
No, I don't know if that's even germane to the issues that they're before us.
I guess my thought on that would be is if there was an issue with the heights, we could have had this conversation without anything being built. And then if there was a way to move things, adjust things, that would be the time to do it. And now we're kind of.
Yeah, but that course left.
Yeah,
behind.
right.
And
So that's
we're to consider the variance request before us.
Yeah.
And make a decision based on the facts presented. And I have some feelings and which way I would vote on this, but I'd like to hear from you both.
Basically saying we've been built lower than would have been a variance required.
That swear out. And it sounds like that's what was submitted to the county for the changeover. And then now different, and so we're asked to.
Then build an improvement.
It changed from what the county had approved, is my understanding. Like, so they had a change order, it had a certain grade to it, and now it's different than that, and that's where.
They have approved the installation, is that correct?
I think if the board needs some clarification, it would be appropriate to direct that to staff, which would either be Joanna or Leslie Lamont in the back there. If there needs to be some clarification about where in the approval process things are.
If you have questions, directed to staff.
If my understanding that right, if there was a change order that was submitted. It showed one thing and now it's different than the.
Correct, it was a change order that was approved. The as-built condition is different than what was approved on the change order.
And do we know, is it like faulty information on the survey? It's the grade that was in the film, or?
Are you asking me why they didn't build according to plan?
I guess I'm just trying to figure out, is it the design that changed or the grades were wrong?
I think that's a question for the applicant.
I think there was a series of events. Again, the tanks and the vertical relationship to the hydrant especially is extremely important to be able to draw water in a way that optimizes public safety. And I think that's a driving force behind all of this. And that's something that we can't mess up. So, I've walked through sort of our progression in getting more precise around the grades that are there, the actual locations, the heights above mean sea level, to provide you with the best information possible. I mean, there is a scenario where the tanks would be lower and maybe we wouldn't have to be sitting through this meeting, but that could put the public in danger if the fire truck pulls up and is not able to draw water in an optimal way. So, while
I think Luke needs to address this, yeah.
Luke is, better to.
Because he wanted
It's directed to Chris. No?
Well, Luke is part of the design team and can speak to this issue.
Yeah, I just wanted to state, hopefully everyone can hear me. I'm Luke Bamberger, the architect of record on the project. And I may have misheard, but I would state that the elevations that were measured by SGM in their survey show that the tanks were located accurately per the plans on sheet FP 300 of the plans. Elevations are called out for the base of tank, top of tank, and then top of grade above that. And those all all match what SGM surveyed. I think where there maybe is a difference that we're speaking to here, and specific to the application for the variance, is that the top of the manholes, the top of the vent weren't called out on the plans, and that was confirmed in the SGM survey. And I think that's maybe where we have some of that discrepancy, and we're asking for some leeway with the variance. But I just would like to state that the bottom of tank, the top of tank, all that was designed and was engineered to make all the hydraulics work.
Thanks, Luke.
And match the.
Thanks for that clarification. Okay, did that satisfy your question?
Yeah, I think so.
I think that the applicant has demonstrated a hardship here that has to its peculiar practical difficulty. And to deny him this variance would create an undue hardship, in my opinion. I can imagine what they'd have to do to lower this a few feet or inches to satisfy neighborly concerns as to the stacks. That I think that could be ameliorated by screening this area as the drive up a field, and satisfy the opponents. And in light of two of the neighbors' support, I'd be in favor of approving this variance for the reasons I mentioned. And I would put that in form of a motion. But there's a second.
I would say I have a hard time proving stuff that's in after the fact. That one really makes it a little tougher, but I also understand the benefit here and the benefit for the community up the road. And I also agree with you that I think if it's an aesthetic issue, then there's probably ways to hide this. So I'm in favor.
It was kind of a moving target all along. I mean, it just kept, the ball kept moving, and we were chasing the ball. We finally wound up with this solution. And, to deny this variance would create, I don't know what that would look like, and I don't know if it would be a benefit to the community to further delay the completion of the project. All right, so we've got a second and some discussion. All in favor, so signify by saying aye. Aye. You got a unanimous approval.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you for your time.
I appreciate everybody's meeting tonight. Sorry it's been so long, but I think justice was served.
Thank you for your time.
Motion to adjourn. Thank you. You can adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Thanks.
Okay.